Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. It's been described as a relationship of convenience, but one that may soon be nearing an end. On the surface, Turkey and Russia have few things in common when it comes to the war in Syria. For years, the two have engaged in a delicate dance, supporting opposing sides in the conflict while making sure it didn't boil over. But the humanitarian crisis in Syria's northwest province of Idlib is straining Turkish-Russian relations to breaking point. Ankara has long warned it would not allow Bashar al-Assad's aggression to go unchecked, be it against Turkish troops or Syrian civilians. But those warnings have fallen on deaf ears in Moscow. Assad continues to violate almost every agreement forged between Turkey and Russia. A series of recent phone calls between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin has done little to ease the mistrust. So how deep is this fracture between two of the most important players in the Syrian conflict? And how will it play out on the ground? To discuss that, I'm joined by Hadi al-Bahra. He is the co-chair of the Constitutional Committee from the Syrian opposition, and Talip Kucukcan, a senior fellow at TRT World Research Center. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you here. Hadi, President Erdogan vowed to kick off an operation unless the regime forces withdrew from the Turkish posts by the end of February. So is Turkey edging towards a direct confrontation with Russian-backed Syrian forces? What do you make of it?
I think President Erdogan has played the role of a wise leader. He did not go to the edges. He showed that he's capable to defend the national interests of Turkey. He prepared for the war. He put the needed forces on the ground for it, but also he did not go full-blown war. He gave time to talks, to negotiation. So this time frame is open for the Russian to act as a wise leader also, and to open a window for peaceful talks and to reach an agreement. Because at the current situation, Turkey has reached the bare-bone point of no return. Russia has stepped on the edges of the national security of Turkey, and also for Syrians as our last resort of the opposition.
Yes.
Because everybody in the world has witnessed how all Syrians were pushed to move towards Idlib, and now they are being slaughtered on a daily basis in that region. So actually, President Erdogan played it wisely. He opened the window for peace. He's prepared for war. He's ready to win that war if he goes, but he is very wise also not to have reached a conflict with the Russian. The message is clear. If there is a war, it should be between Turkey and the regime, not between Turkey and Russia.
They're now accusing each other, actually. And on the other hand, one country that has been closely watching all of these developments was the United States, as discrepancies over Idlib reached a breaking point after a killing of 13 Turkish soldiers. Russia and the U.S. engaged in a social media spat. The U.S. Embassy in Ankara posted a video on its Twitter account with the caption, "Eyes on Idlib, lending full support to NATO ally Turkey." But Russia responded in what looks like an attempt to drive a wedge between Turkey and the U.S. Its embassy in Ankara posted an infographic about Trump's budget proposal for the terror organization YPG, saying the decision is yours. So where does this leave Turkey, Talip, and where does the U.S. draw its line of support to Turkey militarily, let's say?
Well, I think when you look at the U.S. behavior in Syria, there is a lot of difference between Turkey and U.S. As far as U.S. support to PYD and YPG. This is the main, I think, divergence between the two countries. Now, what we see that when Russia becomes much more powerful in the region, it seems that the U.S. Seems to be waking up, actually, but that's too late. And the US, it seems to be so, because U.S. will not really commit its soldiers on the ground or any military, let's say, presence in the region. In that calculation, when you look at the power balance, then again, Russia will be, I think, more influential as far as the regime and the region is concerned. And of course, Turkey expects assistance diplomatically and militarily from its allies, basically from NATO and from US. But it seems that the when you look at the statements by the leaders in the West, including U.S., it's more on the rhetorical and discursive level so far. As long as we don't see any presence.
So you're not hopeful that these leaders, as well as European leaders, would someday step in and shoulder Turkey's burden?
Well, until now, I think Turkey was left on its own on the national security issues and also on the refugee issues that maybe we will touch on in the Idlib case. So
Please
far,
do.
Turkey has been left on its own, and it seems that the Europe and the US and the NATO will not rush to Turkey's help.
Hadi, as Talip just mentioned, why Idlib matters so much, both for Turkey and for Syrian opposition.
For Syrian opposition, it is the last resort of all the Syrian people. Idlib, it's not about Idlib. Idlib, it became as little Syria. It has people from Homs, from Damascus, from Dar'a, from all over Syria.
Yes.
You are talking about small slot of land where around 4 million people living right now, and they seek refuge there under the eye witness of the UN and the international community. So protection of these people has to be provided by the international community, and the only country right now can provide this protection is Turkey. Plus also on the political front and for the negotiation to push for a political resolution, we need also to keep Idlib quiet, to have a ceasefire in this area, and to open the door for the political talks. For Turkey, it represents the Turkish weight in any political resolution coming in Syria in the future.
Yeah.
So also Turkey cannot also let down Idlib because it's essential part for its own national interest and security.
And national security. I was going to ask you that. I mean, what happens if Idlib falls? I mean, this would, of course, endanger Turkey's national security, wouldn't it?
Well, I think, as Hadi said, if Idlib falls, that means Syria will fall at the hands of the regime almost 100%. So it is going to be no return. And of course, when you look at the population, people who are living in Idlib, we are talking about 3-4 million people, and already I think 1 million people are now moving towards the Turkish borders. This is one of the greatest, I think, humanitarian disasters of the 21st century, maybe the first and biggest one at the moment.
The United Nations called it
right.
a horror
And of course, this will have a lot of repercussions and implications for Turkey's national security and also its economic well-being as well. I mean, Turkey already hosts 3.6 million people, spending more than $40 billion. This is not a small amount, and also sociologically speaking, we have some cities where 20-25% of the population is already Syrian. So there's a demographic shift in the region as well. I think when we look at all these variables, there is a gloomy picture in Idlib, and if Idlib falls down, that means it is not going to be in Idlib, but the influence will be the regional countries, and even beyond that. I mean, the European Union and all European countries will face again another maybe wave of immigrants and refugees,
which they dread, unfortunately.
Like 2015.
Hadi, give us a Russian position. Does Putin want to be the only power to call the shots in Syria's future, or is there a possibility that he could compromise, whereby Turkey can have a say over the future of Syria?
I think President Putin should, at the end, come to his, senses to come to a compromise and to take the Syrian people demands for political transition and also to take the Turkish national security into his point of view and to open the door for a settlement through negotiation. But also let me be clear that Turkey now is being threatened by using people, by using the refugees waves towards Turkey, because all these people, they will not go to the regime area.
No.
All these people, they are already in the border area. We are talking about 1,100,000 refugees now. I know more than 1 million ready now packed to move out of their cities if the military operation continues. So in that way, the regime and the Russian, they're using the refugees as a weapon against Turkey and against Europe also. So it's time for Europe also to wake up, because this is a direct threat to their own national security.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see about that. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
It was a 3-year scramble to undo several decades of integration. After voting to leave the European Union in 2016, the UK formally exited the bloc on January the 31st. That's in sharp contrast to Turkey's decades-long EU aspirations, which are now on hold. As Brexit becomes reality, Turkey has lost its biggest supporter for membership in the bloc. There is also fresh uncertainty about trade relations across Europe. But perhaps, amid all the confusion, there may be an opportunity for Ankara and London to forge a new friendship now that the UK has, according to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, recaptured its sovereignty. Let's take a look at this report.
Tonight, we are leaving the European Union.
And joining me now is Ozan Özkural, who is the CEO of global investment firm Tanto Capital Partners. And in London, we have Nick Bois, former British Conservative Party MP, who was Chief of Staff to Dominic Raab, the UK Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Nick, thanks for joining us from London. And Ozan, welcome on set. So as uncertainty looms over after no-deal Brexit, the European Union and other players eager to reap benefits from this situation are trying to position themselves. Among them is Turkey. So is Brexit an opportunity for Turkey to forge its trade ties with the United Kingdom? And what do you think are the most significant obstacles before that?
Sure, I think it absolutely is. I think it's a great opportunity for both sides to bolster the trade that they have historically had over the course of many, many years. That's the easy answer. The more, I guess, nuanced one is that now that UK has 11 months or so to execute Brexit, and there's roughly about 25,000 people working within the government, which is triple the size that it was before 2018, working on it in the UK, I think the main challenge will be in finding the right scope, human resources, to be able to negotiate a successful trade agreement with, not just with Turkey, with many other important counterparties. So the challenge is to try to really get some airtime and some, I guess, management time, if you will.
But it's a limited time. We have only 11 months.
It's a very limited time, a lot of things to do. But is it an opportunity? It absolutely is. Turkey has always been a strategic ally of the UK, and now perhaps this will present a renewed opportunity to also take it a level up.
All right, let's go to London and go to Nick. Nick, we know that the UK wants to diversify its relations politically and economically with the countries now outside of the bloc. Where do you think Turkey, both as a EU and NATO and an European Commission member, stands?
Well, let's be very clear. Turkey is a hugely significant economic, political and security partner to the United Kingdom. And there is no doubt about that right across the government. So that's a good thing. It's also a country that has huge historical ties. Economically, it's understandable that Turkey is keen for a relationship because we are the UK is the #2 exit destination for exports.
Yes.
Now the UK has Turkey as about the 11th most significant buyer of British goods, but that's a good thing because the room for growth and potential with countries exactly like Turkey is very much on the agenda. What's the only thing that's stopping the UK moving quickly with a trade agreement with Turkey is the fact that because Turkey is a member of the customs union with the EU, the negotiations inevitably, shall we say, depend on any agreement that the UK reaches with the EU in its trade talks. And I find that personally frustrating.
Frustrating, and given the fact that the free trade agreement between the European Union and Canada took about 7 years to complete, do you think 1 year is a realistic time frame? And lately, French Foreign Minister Le Drian said he predicted the UK and EU negotiators would rip each other apart in talks. Is it likely?
Well, it's very colourful language. It's entirely what I would expect at the opening of negotiations. There's a lot of positioning going on. But let me be clear about the British position at the beginning of these trade talks, is that we are seeking relationships not just with the European Union, but with many other emerging economies around the world. We do not intend to spend years negotiating a deal with the EU that would frustrate efforts to negotiate elsewhere either. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is very clear, is that he will have an agreement within a year. It will not include this key significant requirement that at the moment the EU are asking for, which is what they call dynamic alignment. Let me tell you what that is. That means that the EU would have to agree to all the rules and regulations as they change in the EU. And that's something Britain did not leave the European Union for. So at the end of this year, there will probably, and this is my opinion, there will probably be a slim agreement in place along with mutual recognition agreements that will allow us to build upon in the future. And more importantly,
but on the other
to
hand,
build a relationship with Turkey.
Yes, and this will affect, if I'm not mistaken, Turkey as well. It seems like it's going to be an ugly divorce. But Turkey's trade minister said exports to the UK are expected to drop by $3 billion in the event of no deal. It was a recent statement. But now that the UK has officially left the European Union, the Turkish exports to the UK will expose competition from Chinese, Vietnamese, and Asian firms. How it would withstand with this?
Look, I mean, ultimately, it is a free market, and what we are looking to aim to create in any sort of a globalized ecosystem is to make sure that there are as little barriers to competition globally as possible to let the, if you will, the best of the firms and countries and sectors kind of win. Going on to your earlier point about, well, now that this is going to be a messy divorce, you know, the notion of an orderly Brexit itself is an oxymoron. That doesn't exist. So I'm quite realistic in terms of what will follow. And I, for one, again, it's my personal opinion, think that eventually down the line, when Brexit is fully delivered and executed, it will benefit the UK. I think UK has the potential to be a much more stronger, globalized, less regulated country that has a firmer and a deeper trading relationship with a lot of its strategic counterparties, including, of course, Turkey. Now, is there a challenge in front of that? Absolutely. It's just that we don't know what the legislative landscape is going to look like as we are circumnavigating the challenges that none of us know precisely that will come our way as a result of that exit mechanism. So, long answer to your question, but how will Turkey react to it? Well, Turkish firms have to always, as per normal firms in any other country rather, focus on their competitive edge. But I think they will find a much more open counterparty in front of them within the UK that is keen to further strengthen both the economic and geostrategic relationships between two countries.
There's also this foreign policy. I want to get back to Nick from a foreign policy perspective. Nick, where do you think the UK will position itself now? Will it adopt a Atlantic line focus policy siding with the US, for example, on Iran, or it stick to the European line? And where will it stand when it comes to foreign policy and security, especially in the Middle East?
Well, Aisha, can I just first quickly pick up on a point that was made on trade and then move on to your foreign policy question? I think it's important to understand that, in a way, we've had the messy divorce. That's what the withdrawal agreement was about. The trade negotiations are very different, and it's worth pointing out that we already have 22 agreements in place covering 50 territories that mean at the end of this year we will transition very smoothly on trading terms with those countries. The only reason we can't do that with Turkey is because of their current relationship with the customs union. But make no mistake, Turkey is an economic and a security partner, a crucial one to the UK. And the appetite for an agreement with Turkey is very high this end, as I sense it is in Ankara as well. So I don't expect it to be too messy. Turning to the future, the question is really, the Prime Minister's been very clear. He wants Britain, which is still the fifth largest economy, one of the leading military and economic powers, to have a significant, huge role on the global stage. This is not about turning away from anything. It is about ensuring that we maintain strong NATO alliances, of course, which Turkey is a key member of. I understand, under current circumstances, the relationship with Turkey and some of its NATO members is a little strained at the moment. But I think it's interesting, though, but that is because quite often many countries and politicians in the West overlook the rather unique challenges that Turkey is facing on its border. We often don't recognize the huge contribution its handling of the migrants, up to nearly 4 million on its border with Syria, the huge, terrible displacement of people there. We don't often understand the challenges that Turkey facing, and I can understand why it sometimes seems frustrated with NATO. And I hope we can reset post-Brexit that relationship, particularly the UK could lead on that, to effectively reset that relationship with Turkey within NATO as well.
All right, so Ankara, from this point, will have to talk to Brussels and London at the same time. What do you think? Will the European Union lose its diplomatic outreach with UK's exit from the bloc? And do you think this will usher in a new era in the Turkey-EU relations?
Well, I wouldn't claim to say something so grandiose at the outset. I mean, we live in a very dynamic world where a lot of the shifts, the paradigm shift that we're going through socially, economically, but also geopolitically is shifting and changing some of the existing dialogues that have been there for a long time. Now, will UK's exit change the EU stance in terms of how they approach foreign policy, especially vis-a-vis Turkey? I don't think so. I think fundamentally what we have to look at and acknowledge is that there is, despite of the fact that UK is exiting the EU, there are still a lot of common factors, vision, value, and a vision for the future of the world that unites us together, regardless of whether we are part of a bloc or not. So when it comes to the foreign policy apparatus, I think the big challenge that a lot of the Western countries, and I include Turkey into that as well, although Turkey has a unique position to be in the middle of it, is going to be much more so talking about how the world deals with the rising power of China, and combating terrorism in a global scale, which impacts all countries in the liberal world.
So, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. Nick, thank you very much for joining us from London. And Ozan, thank you for being here. Appreciate it a lot.
Sure.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.